What's up, everyone? Welcome to day 3 of our Holy Week daily devotions. And today we're looking at Matthew 26, 14 through 16, and 20 through 30. So if you haven't read that already, why don't you pause the video, go ahead and read that section of scripture, and then come on back, and we are going to dive into today's devotion. And so this first section right here, it says, think about it. And it says, Jesus knew what Judas was planning. And again, this story is about Judas denying Jesus, making that deal to give Jesus up to the authorities, and then the Last Supper is that ending section. And it says, Jesus knew what Judas was planning, and yet he included his friend in the Passover supper. Everything Jesus did was on purpose and had special meaning. When Jesus shared the bread and the wine with his friends, he knew the meaning of this meal would last forever, which is kind of crazy to think about, like just that, I don't know, uncomfortable feeling. Maybe at least it would be uncomfortable for me if I knew the person that was going to give me up to be crucified was sitting a couple people down from me, just waving at dinner like, hey, pass the beans. I don't know what they were eating. But this first question here, it says, what was Judas's reward for betraying Jesus? And if in those early verses it says 30 pieces of silver, which I looked up. I did a little bit of research, and it's hard to say exactly kind of how that would equate to today's money, but just about $20 a coin, which would be about $600 to give the God of the universe up to be crucified. And that's not the only time that 30 pieces of silver has been used in Scripture. A couple times in the Old Testament, 30 pieces of silver is used to talk about a day's wages for a shepherd, and it's also used as the worth of a slave. Like a human life slave was worth about 30 pieces of silver. And so those two other mentions just kind of shows kind of how belittled Jesus was in this moment. Like the God of the universe, if you remember kind of yesterday we talked about the different ranks and everything, like God of the universe has to be way up top. And in like biblical times, in the social status and economic status, shepherd and slave and servant were low. And again, slave it meant more kind of like servant than it does kind of our understanding of the word slave. But kind of servant and shepherd were bottom of the totem pole. God of the universe up high. And Judas is saying, you are worth this to me. I'm just going to take my money and run. And I don't know, that's heartbreaking. And I can't imagine sitting at the table knowing Judas being right there. And the second question here, what do you think was going through Judas's mind as Jesus was talking about being betrayed? And as I read that, I was thinking about kind of this question. Just like, imagine going through and Jesus, you're sitting at the table like, so one of you guys is going to betray me. You're going to give me up and you're going to go all the way against me. And just the rest of the disciples kind of freaking out like, what? Why would one of us betray you? We've been following you for years. It's not me, is it? And they kind of go around like, it's not me. Jesus, it's not me. Tell me so that I don't do that. Because none of them wanted to betray Jesus. And then there's this moment where Judas says, right here, he says, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. Like Judas, he's already made this deal. He's already given him up. He's already made the decision. I'm going to turn Jesus in for my $600. And he says, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. He's putting on the act of the century, trying to win his Oscar. And Jesus says, you've said so. And like, whatever you say, Judas, if that's what you want us to believe, then by all means. He doesn't right there call him out and say, you know what, Judas, actually, it is you. And I have some words to think about it. That's kind of how I would want to react in that moment. But Jesus, he's way, way better than I am. And he just kind of says, he doesn't call him out. He doesn't just belittle him and kind of throw him to the wolves, so to speak. He says, kind of has this moment with Judas where it's like, all right, you know I know it's you. And but he doesn't say this, but they kind of have this, you know I know it's you. I know you're putting on an act for everybody else here, but yep, whatever you say, Judas. And I don't know, if I was Judas sitting there, how do you think Judas is feeling? I'd probably his insides are probably doing this, and he's probably nervous. He's probably scared. He's probably embarrassed a little bit. I don't know. Maybe he could be feeling a little proud, like, haha, none of you even know what's going on. But I don't know. If I was Judas and I had done that, and I'm sitting at the table with Jesus and his disciples, the friends that I've been walking around with for years, I'd feel more kind of anxiety and nervous and scared than I would, you guys don't even know what's coming. What did Jesus say about the bread and the cup as he shared the meal with his disciples? It says to look at verse 26 through 28 here, and it says, while they were eating, Jesus said, he took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body given for you. And then same with the cup, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. And so we've heard that before in church. We've heard this because this is what we say leading into communion. We practice this Last Supper to kind of remember this moment of Jesus saying, like, let's be in community and remember what Jesus did for us and what this kind of represents, this new covenant that Jesus is explaining. And we have, like, hindsight, we know what happens next. The disciples, they're listening to this little communion speech, kind of thinking, like, what? He's doing this thing again where he says something and I don't know where he's going with it, but I'll figure it out later. And gosh, right? I know, he always does this. And they're kind of having this moment like, what are you talking about here, Jesus? And so we know, like, this is this new covenant that Jesus, he's saying the old way is done. I'm going to be on the cross. I am going to be crucified, and all sins are going to be forgiven because of, like, this new moment, this new covenant. And Jesus, he's presenting that to the disciples at this Last Supper, which is just super cool. And this last question here, kind of, the first question was, what was Judas's reward for betraying Jesus? This last question, what cost did Jesus pay for you, and why? And I think the cost is a whole lot more than 30 pieces of silver. It's a whole lot more than that $600. Some scholars say that, like, the most it could be in today's money is $3,000. I think Jesus, the cost is way more than that. Like, he poured out his entire life. This crucifying, this was the most, like, brutal way to be executed that exists. And Jesus, he took on not only that physical burden, but he took on the spiritual burden of all of sin, the sin of humanity, the brokenness, that disconnection between us and God. He took the weight of that and said, I will be the perfect sacrifice. I will be that lamb and be the one sacrifice forever and always to forgive the sin of the world, so that you, God's creation, could have relationship with him and could, like, be completely and totally forgiven. And again, we look back at maybe yesterday's devotion of washing the feet, like something we don't deserve. Like, the God of the universe, you are so much better and higher than us. You're looking down to us and saying, like, I'm going to forgive you. And I don't know, it's easy for me sometimes to get, like, entitled and prideful and, like, oh, well, I'm a good Christian, I'm a good person. And then you just think about sometimes how, like, gross my heart is and how prideful I can be and how selfish I can be. And I just think, like, how the sin is just ingrained into who I am at times, and to, like, as much as I'm trying to get closer to Jesus, I still fall short. And to have the God of the universe look down at me continuing to fall short, and not as an excuse to just sin and do whatever I want, but just because we're broken, and for God to look down at me and say, Jeff, I love you anyways. I did this for you, so take and eat. Like, take this cup and drink from it. This new covenant, it's for you. And so the cost was everything. He bore the weight of sin for you and me. And why? So that we could be in relationship with him. And I think that is it's unbelievable. It is so cool. And every time I just really sit and think. Like, I'm a pastor, I study this stuff, I went to school for this stuff, I understand this on an intellectual level. I can read the Bible, I know these stories, but when I sit down and I think, like, holy cow, God saw me and my brokenness and my sin, and he knew that this was going to happen. He knew that every single one of us was going to betray him. We were going to be Judas. We were going to say that there's times in our lives when we're going to choose sin over God, and he's going to say, you know what? You still have a seat at the table. And it's unbelievable to me. And I need to rest in that, I think, more than I do. This family activity, to close things out, gather 30 coins and place them in a small bag, pass the bag around, and take turns feeling the contents, shaking it to hear the clinking of the coins while you are passing the bag around. Have a conversation about the evils associated with money. Why are people willing to do terrible things for money? What if you were offered $10,000 to do something illegal, dishonest, or unkind? How would you handle the temptation? And then leave the bag of money in the worship space to remind you of today's story. So I'm going to go grab some coins. I think I can find some, and then I'll be right back. So here we go. We got 30 pieces of silver. I know this is just change. It's not worth exactly how much it would be, like the amount that Judas took, but just like to think it was probably a bag just like this. It was just a chunk of silver that he gave Jesus over for, and I don't know if you've got the cash, maybe you can throw $600 in here to get the full effect, but just to think like a bag of coins for the God of the universe. And maybe we would say like we're so much better than Judas, we would never do that, but just to think about the times in our life when we choose sin over God, and to realize that we're kind of taking this bag over God. I think it's a good reminder for us to realize like we aren't perfect. We can't be perfect, which is why we needed Jesus to do what he did. Like from the very beginning, God set this plan in motion for Jesus to come and serve us and save us ultimately. And so I think this is a pretty cool reminder that we're going to have here for the rest of the week. So thank you guys for joining us today. We'll see you back tomorrow for day 4.